Good morning, world. Good morning, namaste, and Nissan Bulavinaka from Sydney, Australia. I am Sashi Singh, and welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Episode 23 last week was a program that can best be summed up as unfinished business, with our chief guest, the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament Fiji, and leader of the National Federation Party. We complete our interview with Professor Prasad today in part 2 of episode 23 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Shortly, in a no-holds-barred one-on-one interview with the National Federation Party leader, we will discuss the scourge of corruption in Fiji, look at the National Federation Party Memorandum of Understanding with the People's Alliance and their plans for governance, discuss the expectations of free and fair elections, and talk a lot more on things that affects lives of all Fijians. As always, may I please request that you share the SSTP page on your own timelines so that we may share the interview with Professor Biman Prasad with as many interested people as possible. To ensure that you receive instant notifications for all future programs, please like the SSTP page and follow us too, if you can. If you're joining us for the very first time, a big welcome to you. Welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point, SSTP, coming your way live on Facebook as well as on YouTube. As always, we begin today's program with a warm welcome to our regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, former Fiji TV journalist, to tell us of the key happenings of the political week in Fiji and in Australia. Nikhil, top of the morning to you. Welcome to SSTP. Good morning.
Good morning, Sashi, and good morning to the viewers.
Nikhil, let us begin your segment with news from Fiji. First up, there has been a lot of speculation as to when the general election will be called. We can see all political parties are on the campaign trail. Are we any closer to knowing when the elections will be called?
Well, Sashi, there is a huge window for when the elections can be called. If you recall, the Electoral Commission had issued a statement late last year, early last year. The Commission said that the 26th of May this year was the first or the earliest date the writ could be issued. We are, of course, way past the date. The Commission also stated that the last date the writ can be issued is the 26th of November. There's going to be a period from the time the writ is issued and the ballot commences. There was a lot of speculation that the ruling party would probably take on the earliest date following the delivery of their mini budget in March. This has not happened. We are now hearing from political pundits that the government will wait until they deliver their full budget in July. What I think we can assume, Sashi, is that elections will not be held anytime before October this year. And this is because, as reported in the Fiji Times, the supervisor of elections last week said that the Fiji Elections Office is planning to conduct a nationwide voter registration drive in the month of August, and that they are also looking at conducting another round of overseas voter registrations with more details on this to be announced in due course. So, Sashi, this is what the plan is, that there'll be more registration drives happening in August, and with the period that you get to wait from the date the writ is issued, certainly not seeing an election before October.
It seems to be all cloak and dagger stuff, Nikhil. It's unfortunate that elections can't be announced as they do here in Australia. A date is given right from the outset, and all political parties, all voters know what's expected of them. Anyway, that's my thoughts and feelings. I mentioned election campaigning. Opposition political parties have expressed concerns about not having a level playing field. What do you have for us on this front?
Well, I guess this goes to the point that many of your guests have made on these programs, Sashi, where they've highlighted that electoral laws requiring political parties to reveal costings. And if you don't, then you can serve some jail time or face a fine or both if convicted. So if political parties are drawing up their manifestos, then they must ensure that any promise they make is fully costed. Now, your guest last week, Biman Prasad, spoke in depth about this. If you look at the ruling party, the opposition is saying that they will not have to comply with this requirement because they will use the budget announcement as their manifesto. And this is what the NFP leader Prasad said, as reported in the Fiji Times. He said the 2022-23 national budget provides the perfect excuse for the Fiji First government to flout every campaign rule by using public funds to be on the campaign trail. Fijians should get ready to be visited by a conga line of cabinet ministers. I think, Sashi, we've already seen that. They will try to justify this by claiming they are implementing budgetary measures. Prasad said that after the 2018 election, which is quite a important point that he raises, the multinational observer group emphasized the need for government to go into caretaker mode after observing how Fiji First party ministers were opening projects, handing out funds, making major public policy decisions, even during the period of wreaths of elections. So Prasad said, not surprisingly, the Fiji First government did not adopt any of those that recommendation by the observer group when amending the Electoral Act in June, as he says, for obvious reasons. The People's Alliance Party hopes the national budget eliminates the need for what Rabuka says, and I quote, lollies and sweeteners in the form of freebies in light of the upcoming general elections. Party leader Rabuka said that they hope the government would not opt for would rather opt for a reasonable budget. Unity Fiji party leader and former Reserve Bank of Fiji Governor Savinanda Narumbe has got a slightly different take on this. He's gone and said that no matter what the Fiji First government does with the budget, that this budget will not save the Frank Bainimarama government. He's told the Fiji Times that the government has showed us that it does not respect anyone but itself. They trample on our rights and take us as fools in this country. As the saying goes, what goes around will come around very soon. Narumbe went on to say the government will announce the election budget in July, and I expect this election budget to be their main weapon that this government will use to win back the voters, the many voters that are leaving the Fiji First party. But this election budget will not be enough to save them. People have simply had enough.
All right, no doubt my chief guest this afternoon, Professor Biman Prasad, will be sharing some light on those subjects as well. Let me now turn to civil servants. The Attorney General said last week that they need to look at insensitivizing civil service as they prepare for the 2022-2023 national budget. He says they will look at the scarcity of skill set and the retention issues within the civil servants. This has been shot down as a political gimmick and a vote-buying tactic by a former prime minister. Please do tell us more.
Well, the Fiji Labour Party leader Mahendra Chaudhry has said exactly that, Sashi. This is a vote-buying gimmick. In a statement, Chaudhry said it is ironical that after single-handedly demoralizing the civil service, the Attorney General now desperately talks of incentivizing it to retain staff. He said over the years, the Attorney General has been riding roughshod over workers' rights and welfare, and now he has suddenly woken up to the follies of his policies. Chaudhry has said that public service unions have been denied their collective bargaining rights since 2009, and that they have been unable to freely negotiate pay increases and improvements to working conditions for their members for over 13 years. He's summed it up as saying that this is all an election vote-buying gimmick. It is not that the Attorney General has woken up one morning and saying, oh, I should look at the civil service because they are the most important asset of any government. Sashi Mahendra Chaudhry, I think, would know a thing or two about the civil service, not only as a former Prime Minister, but also as the former Secretary General of the Fiji Public Service Association, who led the first ever civil service workers' strike in 1973.
Now, closer to home, Nikhil, there is some relief for those workers on the minimum wage. A ruling by the Fair Work Commission will see the wages lift by 5.2%. Unions have welcomed this decision.
Yes, actually, Sally McManus, the Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, or the ACTU, has welcomed the ruling. She said unions had fought hard for the increase against employers pushing for a big real wage cuts. Unions had asked for a 5.5% lift in the national minimum wage, while the employer groups had suggested a more modest rises of about 2.5%. The new Labor government, the Albanese Labor government, had also made submissions to the Fair Work Commission, in which it called for low-paid workers' pay not to go backwards, meaning a 5.1% increase in line with headline inflation, which the Reserve Bank of Australia has suggested will go as high as 7% by year's end. Such the ruling will see those on the minimum wage getting an extra $40 a week. The new national minimum wage will now be $812.60 per week, or $21.38 per hour.
That augurs really, really well for minimum wage earners, Nikhil, particularly in light of the rising interest rates and the expectation of more interest rate hikes in Australia. And before I let you go this afternoon, results from the recent federal elections are still being finalized in some seats. I note that the Australian Electoral Commission has rejected a request for a recount in the federal seat of Gilmore. What can you tell us about this?
Yes, Sashi, out in the South Coast, the seat of Gilmore turned out to be the tightest contest in the country. The incumbent, Labor's Fiona Phillips, seeing a fierce challenge from former New South Wales Transport Minister Andrew Constance, who had resigned from state parliament to have a tilt at going to Capitol Hill. Fiona Phillips emerged as the winner by just 373 votes. However, Constance entered the formal request with the Australian Electoral Commission on Tuesday last week, hours before Labor MP Fiona Phillips, the incumbent, was due to be declared the winner by that 373 votes. Constance, a Liberal candidate, cited concerns about the scrutineering process, particularly in regards to informal votes. The AEC said the request was carefully considered, but it was satisfied the proper procedures had been followed and there were no grounds to allow it. So that request has been rejected. Sachi, when I had shared the initial results a few episodes ago, in the immediate days after the federal election results, I had mentioned that One Nation leader Pauline Hanson was on the verge of losing her Senate seat based on those early voting trends. Counting has been progressing in those Senate spots that were up for re-election. What I can confirm is that Pauline Hanson has retained her Queensland Senate spot despite One Nation recording a small swing against it. And if you look at the Liberal Party, the coalition, losing a number of their candidates at this election, if you turn our eyes to the upper house of the Senate spots, Amanda Stoker, who was the Assistant Attorney General, she has lost her spot in the Senate, and so has Eric Abetz, another Liberal senator, and he was in the Senate, had been in the Senate for 28 years.
All right, Nikhil, we'll watch for the final results in the final washout one of these days. Thank you very much for your contribution today. As always, very nicely presented. Look forward to seeing you in the next program. Have a wonderful afternoon. God bless you.
Looking forward to it, Sashi. Thank you.
You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live. We ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. Fijians want to know. Please like and follow the SSTP page if you have not done so. I have an important announcement to share with our viewers at this juncture. Sashi Singh's Talking Point, SSTP, recognizes that questioning, constructive arguments, and opinions are part of conversation, but posts with aggressive, personal attacks, profanity, name-calling, swearing, defamatory in nature, and or threatening will be removed immediately, and offenders will be blocked from being a part of the SSTP program. Let's observe these rules and enjoy the program. Now it's time to meet our chief guest on SSTP as we continue part 2 of episode 23. The Honorable Professor Dhiman Chand Prasad, current member of Fiji's parliament and leader of the National Federation Party. Welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point again, Professor Prasad. It's a pleasure to welcome you as a returning guest. Good afternoon in Fiji.
Good afternoon, Sashi, and good afternoon to everyone watching this program. Pleasure to be back again.
Well, thank you very much for allowing us the privilege of having you back again. We had unfinished business from last week. Let's pick up from where we left off last week and get straight to the program proper. And I would like to begin on the subject of corruption. The 2006 coup was supposedly carried out by Bainimarama and his supporters to clean out the country and clear it of corruption. By any standards of measure, it seems that corruption is absolutely rife. What are your observations in Fiji?
First point, Sashi, that the coup in 2006 by Frank Bainimarama was a naked grab for power and to remain in power. So it had nothing to do with corruption or removing corruption. And you're absolutely right that since 2006, and we know very well what happened between 2006 and right up to 2014 with respect to the Auditor General's reports and why those reports were not made public and why some of those reports, under scrutiny when we got into Parliament in 2014, was scuttled eventually, through the removal of the opposition member chairing that Public Accounts Committee. So, yes, I can say that the perception that there's more corruption now is widely held.
Okay, now there are so many instances of investigations never being completed. People attribute this to corruption. Let me just raise a few matters that still remain unresolved. There is the $40 million FNU Lambasa matter, the $12 or $13 million Lautoka swimming pool fiasco, the $33 million digger scam, the FSC scam regarding Abdul Khan, just to name a few. Now, there is a long list of these type of matters, as I said, that still remains unresolved. My question to you, Professor Prasad, is whether you think under this current FFP government, there has been an escalation of what is deemed to be corrupt practices that just does not seem to be resolved anytime soon.
It is, as you highlighted very clearly, Sashi, with those examples. And if you just take those examples and many others which perhaps have never been reported, and the perception, widespread perception in the community, in the country, and we have seen international indexes, corruption, perception index, which shows that Fiji has gone backwards. And those cases that you've highlighted, and one in particular, let me say this very clearly, is that I have raised the issue of the FSC, the former FSC CEO, and why the investigations have been delayed or have not been completed. I raised that in Parliament, and of course the Prime Minister, who is in charge of the sugar industry, answered that the investigations are still going on. And it's been like that for 3 or 4 years now.
I find that amazing because a good government should be transparent, and any investigation of that nature should be front and center. What are your comments on what I've just said?
Absolutely. Any government which believes in transparency, accountability, which believes in good use of taxpayers' money would take every allegation, seriously, and those responsible, those independent institutions responsible for investigating that, looking at that, must take that as a serious issue, because the people in this country and everywhere else, Sashi, want their taxpayer dollar to be used properly and not stolen from them. And if there is any allegation, any perception of corruption, by the government officials, ministers, or anyone heading statutory organizations or government-owned, commercial companies, that ought to be investigated as a matter of agency, because that's about restoring confidence in the way in which government manages taxpayers' funds in the country.
Why do you think corruption is rife and perpetrators are not being brought front and center, as I said, for charges to be laid and criminal proceedings to begin? I mean, why is there such a sick and sorry state of affairs prevalent in Fiji?
Well, all I can say is that perhaps the institutions are not working in the way that they should be working. And perhaps, and we know that there's been political influence and political interference in the processes of, accountability and transparency. And we know what happened to what has happened to Auditor General's reports, the condemnation by government ministers, including the Minister for Economy, of the way in which the Auditor General conducts his work. We've had cases where the Auditor General's report, after being presented in Parliament, was corrected by the Ministry of Economy. So if people feel that there is political interference, if the people can get away with corruption or corrupt practices, then you can see more and more of that happening, and without people knowing it. So I think it's important for us to understand that political influence in any institution, such as the Auditor General's office, can have devastating impact on the ability of institutions to understand and also make sure that there is no corruption, and those that engage in corrupt practices are brought to account.
Do you think there are two different rules in operation in Fiji, different strokes for different folks? The rich and famous get richer, and the poor go to jail or are persecuted for years?
Well, one thing I can say, Sashi, with certainty is that this government has been captured, as I said before, by a cabal who are connected with government through businesses, through contracts. And many of these who are part of this cabal are actually Fiji First Party's funders. And we know how they raise funds, and therefore the state, there is a thing called state capture by a group of people, wealthy people, influential people, and those who have influence with key government people and ministers. And alternatively, you have ministers, you have a government, which is hell-bent on remaining in power, which is worried about, collecting funds for campaigns, and therefore uses this group, or allows this kind of group to influence what happens in government, not only in terms of policies, but in terms of making laws, which apparently, benefit some of them. So that's been happening, and we've been highlighting this both, inside Parliament and outside Parliament. So absolutely agree with what you were saying, Sashi.
I'm not sure whether I asked you this question last week, but I think it's important for me to address this question with you this morning. If you formed a government in alliance with any number of coalition partners after the election, would you like to see a commission of inquiry being set up to investigate a whole range of matters that needs to be investigated?
Absolutely, Sashi. While I've said very clearly that we are not going to run a vindictive government, we are not going to be chasing people just because there is this perception, and we're not going to be a vindictive government. However, if the law has been broken, if corruption that has existed there or has been reported has not been investigated, and the operation of some of the independent institutions and how they work. I mean, commission of inquiries are not only just to bring out the bad in what has happened, but also commission of inquiry, Shashi, can help us, the next government, to look at the faults, look at the processes, and where we can improve the system. And so we can have a very transparent, accountable, not only governing independent institutions, but also how government can lay its hands off some of these independent institutions and provide the appropriate resources and the space and time for these institutions to operate efficiently, effectively, independently, to make sure that corruption does not take place and that state resources and taxpayer funds are effectively and efficiently used and not wasted.
Well said, very well reasoned indeed. Let me now look at the Tertiary Education Loans and Scholarship Services, TELS loans. There has been an announcement of plans by the Ministry of Economy and Tertiary Education Loans and Scholarship Service to negotiate with financial institutions to provide loans to students to enable them to pay 50% of their debt and clear their TELS loans. Now, you said on Friday that if government can justify its huge debt portfolio by saying it has obtained long-term loans at concessionary terms of up to 40 years, it is only fair that our financially stricken students, young graduates, and their parents are given at least a 5-year repayment holiday. You said this was an election gimmick doomed to fail. What was the basis of your statement, and why did you call it an election gimmick?
It is absolutely an election gimmick, Sachi, because what is clear is that the government has not managed this program very, very carefully. In fact, when they started in 2014, it was all designed, to hype up. In fact, they wrongly called TELS loans scheme as TELS scholarship, and initially when it started, many parents, and I know that many parents actually believed that this was all scholarships. A large percentage of the people, in fact, in 2014, only 600 got, what they call toppers scholarship. They've increased that a little bit, but a large majority of the students who go to tertiary institutions have to borrow. And when they get out, depending on the duration of their degree or certificate or diplomas, they, on average, they are lended with, 20 to 30,000 or 40,000, depending on the duration of the course and the nature of the degree program. $20 to $40,000 debt on the head when they get out with their certificate, degree, or diplomas. Now, the government should understand that we are going through a very, very difficult period. What they are offering is a scheme which is only perhaps going to be advantageous or in some sense used by those students who have rich parents, who have the income, who have the security to go to a bank. So, for example, if I owe $50,000 to you, what you tell me is, Biman, you go, you have a friend, and they say, why don't you borrow 25,000 from so and so, and pay me 25,000, and I will give you a discount of 25,000, because that it is unlikely that you are going to collect that $50,000 from me. So I go to somebody else, borrow 25,000 from that somebody and pay you 25,000. You recovered, 50% of your debt, but I have to pay the 25,000. And what they are saying is, you go to financial institutions. I haven't seen any detail, with respect to which banks are going to provide that, what sort of security they will require. So, if you have a $130,000 or $100,000 loan to pay, you can borrow 50,000 from a bank. That's what they are trying to say, and pay 50,000 to FRCS, and they will write off your 50,000. Many students, many families, in the absence of any details yet, may not have the ability to actually go and borrow even that 50,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 from a commercial bank. So, in some sense, when they announced it, it sounds pretty good, like for some people, okay, I'm just going to pay 50% of my loan. but a large majority of the students, especially those who come from poor families, may not have the ability. But what it does is, in an election year, in a campaign period, this is a gimmick. That's why I called it an election gimmick, and I maintain that. And it is quite shameful for government, to come up with this kind of gimmicks in an election year, to to confuse and perhaps get the students to vote for them, or the graduates to vote for them.
Still on TELS, it has been reported that the Minister for Economy, while speaking on the 2022-2023 national budget plans, has said that people who have taken the TELS loans from government and have completed their graduate studies and want to go overseas to work will be given some flexibility. He said they are looking at flexible arrangements for those on TELS loans. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, he should know that there is no option. I mean, if people don't have jobs here, and in fact, this is a government, which keeps saying, oh, we are trying to send people to go to Australia, New Zealand. Of course, you will do that, when people can't find jobs. And as I said, 2 years ago in Parliament, when we were under COVID lockdown, that once the borders open, we will see an exodus of skilled people, middle level, managers and people with skills that we need in this country are leaving, and they're leaving because they don't have the kind of confidence that this government ought to create amongst our young people. And many of them are leaving because they feel that the whole education system is broken, our health system is in a mess, and people are leaving for different reasons. And therefore, those who don't have jobs and have completed their qualifications and degrees and diplomas and masters, you have to give them some flexibility. Again, it's been announced, just like everything else that this government does, without details, to make it sound very, very good.
Professor Prasad, let me now address the proposed 2022-2023 national budget with you. This national budget will be delivered on the 15th of July this year. The Minister for Economy, Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, says the writ of elections has not been issued as of now. Therefore, the government has to prepare the budget for the new financial year starting on 1st August 2022. The budget will be premised on Fiji's post-pandemic recovery, according to the minister. Surely now, the opposition parties can very well expect the Minister for Economy to hand down a budget that will have all sorts of sweeteners, promises to deliver infrastructure, bring all sorts of relief to the general population. I guess you name it, the minister, in all probability, will have it covered in the budget. What are you expecting in the budget?
Shashi, to answer that question, let me take the viewers back to what happened before the 2018 election. And that is what is going to be repeated. They actually came up with a budget in 2018, and you're absolutely right. It was a budget to provide everything to everybody. And they went on a rampage. They committed all kinds of expenditures. They made all kinds of announcements. For example, in a 2018 budget, they said, oh, we're going to build an airport in Sayanga. There was some allocation. It sounded very good to a lot of people. In fact, some of my friends were saying to me, oh, no, maybe we should buy, they should buy land near Sayanga because there'll be an airport soon, because that's what the minister has said in the budget. It was a feel-good budget, and it was also an opportunity to include funds to go and distribute, what do you call lollies? We call it freebies at that time, when supposedly, they were going into an election in 2018 at the back of what they called, Bainimarama boom. Now, what happened after that, because of the reckless budget and reckless spending and wastage, when we came into 2019, the economy had contracted. So this election, this budget, that they are leaving it too late. In fact, the budget will be approved almost at the end of July, and the new financial year will kick in on the 1st of August. Now, again, the ability of the civil servants and the ability of ministries to actually implement and understand the different policies, the tax changes, whatever that will come with the budget would be very, very difficult. So the motivation for the 2022-23 budget in July will, of course, be the election, because this is a government which is always in a campaign mode, which is always worried about losing power. So Sashi, he's not telling, he's right that the writ has not been issued, so therefore the budget has to be presented because the new financial year starts on the 1st of August. So you got to have a budget, to have a government, which can run. So, but he's not telling the people of this country that this government has made a rule. They have got a campaign rule that has kicked in on the 26th of April. And the supervisor of election has put out a candidate's handbook, which very clearly says when the campaign will begin, which is 26th of April, and all the campaign rules kick in on the 26th of April. Now, what this government's plan in this budget would be to use this budget to flout every campaign rule. So first of all, the Minister of Economy is already out there, in the name of so-called, consultation for the budget. It's going to the people, talking to them, finding out, where what people are saying and identifying different groups, where they can see votes, and they will tinker with the budget in July and try and pacify and offer things without looking at the post-pandemic recovery strategy, without having a very clear understanding of the policies, because their focus is campaign. So they will campaign before the budget is going to go around, and this is using state resources. When you go and assemble people at the expense of the taxpayers, and talk about how good your government is, how good you've done in terms of your management of COVID-19, how the opposition is so bad, they are like, that's all campaigning. That's all campaigning in a campaign period when the government only knows when they're going to call the election, the opposition doesn't. So it's a very clear case of a government which is desperate to remain in power and that they will flout every rule. What they will do in the budget, Sashi, let me come to that also. It'll be an exaggerated budget. And I can tell you, I will say this in Parliament, I can say this before the budget, that there will be exaggerated figures, there will be exaggerated numbers on revenue. There would be a lot of allocation, what we call in the budget Head 50, where the money is allocated for certain expenditure, certain projects in what we call Head 50, and other ministries, when they require that money, they would have to request the Minister for Economy. It's called money on requisition. And some of that money that we know in the previous budgets was never there, was never allocated, is never released, never approved. But when the budget comes out, when he announces all these policies in the budget, the people are listening, the people are saying, this is very good, we're going to get this. How many people actually benefit out of that, how it's implemented, nobody knows. So it'll be a campaign speech by the Minister of Economy. It'll be a boastful speech, which will package the lies and the deceits, hide the actual statistics on poverty and the real problems that people are going through, hide the mess in the health system, hide the fact that they have wasted so much money and they have nothing to show. This is what will come out in the budget, and you will have this conga line of ministers, parading themselves in that 1 week of budget debate, boasting about what this government has done. So it'll be a totally election campaign, boastful, exaggerated budget designed to fool the people. But let me say this. despite, I mean, if you look at the mathematics of what happened in 2018, despite the massive spending, despite the massive, expansionary budget, before the election, they almost lost the election. They had to hide at level 9, to strategize how to deal with the case that we had taken to Parliament. But this is not going to save them this time, because the people are not fools. The people have seen the government's record on COVID management. People know that we survived because of the help from our partners, from our people, through remittances. People understand the wastage that this government has engaged. So at the end of the day, while we can expect all these wastage between now through consultation and the lies and the exaggeration that we will hear in the budget, this is not going to save the Fiji First party in the next election.
Given that the Fiji First Party is in the box seat when it comes to handing out freebies to various sectors of the community, given that the Minister for Economy will take the budget roadshow and speak to the masses on the good of the Fiji First Party, how does the opposition parties approach such a strategy, given that opposition parties cannot hand out freebies?
Well, I think, as I said, Sashi, the people have actually understood that. People saw what happened in 2018. They realized that the $1,000 they may have got just before the election, or the water tank that they got, which they never used in the last 4 years, some of them, or the farm implements that they got. It was a very, very temporary. It's not sustainable, and the amount of money, amount of expenses, the rising cost of living, not only just after the pandemic, but even before that. So people have understood that the gimmick that this government engages in, and we are highlighting that to the people, and some people are telling us very, very clearly. They're saying, look, Professor, we know what this government is doing. We know this is our taxpayers' money. We will take what is due to us. This is not coming out of some minister's pockets in the Fiji First Party. It is our money. So many of them, and I actually have trust in our people. I have faith in our people. I think, sometimes there are people in this government who think, oh, the farmers don't understand. We can go and lie. We can take them for a ride. But our people are wise. They have the wisdom to understand what is right and wrong, and that's what they are telling us. They are telling us that they will take what the government gives because it is their money. If it is not their money, it's coming from our international partners, donors, and therefore, it is quite legitimate for them to. And many of them, need the help. However small it might be, and we are not opposed to that. But the government must not use the campaign period. And I've said this before, that if a particular area or a settlement needs a harvester, rice harvester, or a tractor, or a tank, or compost bins, that should be handled by the permanent secretaries. That should be handled by the senior civil servants. Why is the government, if they have any shame, they will not allow ministers going out there, parading themselves, taking pictures and handing out, harvesters or tanks or compost bins. And this is what they've been doing everywhere. Even handing cash, and so that is what bothers us. And the international community, donors, who understand, who continue to provide support to our people, also understand the motivation behind this government and how they actually use things provided by our donors, to campaign out there. And I urge, our international partners, community, where possible, they should use our NGOs. There are many effective NGOs, who were shining during the pandemic when the government was nowhere to be seen. They should use that medium as well in this campaign period to help our people, to ensure that government doesn't use their money and their assistance to advance their political agenda and campaign.
Professor Prasad, the Minister for Economy, Syed Qayyum, has also said they hope to have the budget approved by 29th of July. What do you think of this time frame for approving the budget? Does it allow enough sufficient time for debate?
I think we are going through a normal budget debate this time. That's I have no issues with that. But I would have liked to see the budget announced earlier and budget approved. At least 2 weeks before the new financial year kicks in on the 1st of August, so that the civil servants, we know, Shashi, that this government, this is what they do. They do things in the last minute. They're not sure. It's all patchwork. And last time, this is what happened. Some measures announced in the budget, for example, the VAT reduction, the FRCS was not ready. The system was not ready. It's still probably not ready. And so that's why I'm saying that, some of the announcements, that they will make will be exaggerated. It will not be a finished product. It will still be, with a lot of uncertainties. And the civil servants, hardworking civil servants, I don't blame them. They are under siege. And they don't get very, very clear instructions from this confused government and especially confused ministers. And therefore, the implementation is always an issue, not only right now after pandemic, but we know that it was the case even before that.
All right, now you call the majority of the Fiji First members of Parliament the Silent 25. And now that the election campaign is more or less in motion, you are on record as saying that after 3 years, ministers have emerged from their cocoon's nest to parade themselves before the people. Please explain. I think you have partially already explained that, but please do touch on this.
Yeah, the reason why I label them as Silent 25, Shashi, and of course, they've come around and said, oh, we are all a united force. But I said, they may be united in silence as well. So the point is that this is my observation in Parliament. The Attorney General, does all the talking in Parliament. Sometimes the ministers, in my view, are not up to speed with what's happening in their portfolio. And we've seen many, many instances of, where the Attorney General has to answer questions on behalf of the ministers, and he makes announcements. For example, he presents all the bills on behalf of any bills or any law to deal with any particular minister is always presented by the Attorney General. I know in previous parliaments the minister concerned would do that, but I know a lot of them privately tell me that they can't say anything which is independent. Some of them admit, and I don't have to name them. They might get a sex if I name them, but they do. And many of them I know are frustrated with the way in which two people just determine everything in that government. And that's why we say, it's a two-man government.
We'll discuss the two-man government in a little while. Now, during the parliamentary sitting last month, you moved a motion that Parliament authorized the Standing Committee on Economic Affairs to address the impact of direct initiatives to farmers in the agricultural sector, in particular, and I quote, the distribution of seeds and seedlings for cash crop, help in the form of materials provided to dairy farmers, provision of irrigation pumps and piping, rice planting, ploughing, and harrowing of land by the Ministry of Agriculture, and handling of breeder goats, sheep, and report back at the next sitting of Parliament. Now, Professor Prasad, to any ordinary person, this would seem to be a worthwhile motion to move in Parliament. However, Prime Minister Voreqe Bainimarama accused you for always coming up with baseless motions for money-wasting ideas so that you can, quote, shilly-shally and idle away the nation's time. How do you respond to such an outburst?
Well, sometimes the prime minister reads what he's given, and obviously he didn't understand what the motion was always going to be about. But before I answer that specific question on that motion, Sasi, let me just, for the interest of the viewers, say this: that in the last 7.5 years, I've made very many motions. Whether it's on health, whether it's on drug, whether it's on sugar industry, and these have been very, very sensible motions. And in fact, when we move that motion, we suggest a committee, and we suggest that it should be chaired by a government, assistant minister or chair of the standing committee, which are inevitably the government members, and they have a majority. But they have never once in the last 7.5 years, Sashi, supported any motion by the opposition for a inquiry, for a committee, which will be chaired by them, which will include majority of the members from the government. They have never. We, on the other hand, in the opposition, we have always taken a very sensible approach. When government brings, a particular law or a bill, we feel that is in the interest of the people, that it should be supported. We have supported that. We have voted with the government on a number of bills and a number of motions, number of guarantees. So we have behaved, as a responsible opposition. This is a government which is always afraid of any kind of inquiry, any kind of evaluation. And this motion on agriculture was a very simple, clear. In fact, it was designed to help the government, so that the people who are being assisted by the agriculture ministry, and the reason why we moved that motion, Sashi, was because we get a lot of feedback from the people. We know that it was not being implemented properly. Some people were benefiting, some were not. Those who needed it most were being left out. And therefore, we brought this motion to simply say, hey, guys, have a look at how it's being done. Get a committee which will be chaired by your government minister, and which will have majority of the members. Go around the country, a week or two, and just find out, so that you can improve the system. You can improve the scheme. You can improve the implementation, the effectiveness, and improve efficiency. That's what we are asking. But they thought, because they are fearful. They are fearful because they would have people would have come out to the committee and said, what's happening? So they are always afraid of criticism. And this has been a fundamental problem with this government. I mean, when we get into government, Sashi, we're not going to be afraid of criticism. We will have inquiries, we will have evaluations, because that's what a good government should do, is to evaluate its own policy and its own strategies.
All right. And when the Prime Minister calls you that your ideas are money-wasting ideas, how do you respond to that?
Well, he should look at his own government's record between 2015 and 2020, where, in my view, and I've said this in Parliament, that they wasted about $3 billion, an average of about $500 million a year, which, in my view, has been indirectly stolen from the taxpayers of this country through wastage, pilferage. So he should worry about that. He shouldn't worry about, the little expense or the standing committee's expense on having an inquiry, which would have improved the way in which the farmers were being assisted.
Okay, I'll come back to that wastage that you've raised in a little while. The Prime Minister said that after breaking records in 2020, agriculture exports rose to a further $123 million in 2021. You said one only had to look at the 2020 Agriculture Survey summary to note the decline of the industry despite the exclusivity. What is the reality of the situation, Professor Prasad?
The reality is that they neglected the agriculture sector. They put all the eggs in one basket. They overwhelmingly, concentrated on the tourism industry. All the investment, all their focus, all their attention was going on to one sector, which is the tourism industry, because that's where they were surrounded by all the cabal. who thought, tourism is the only way to go. We've always said that, to have a more sustainable economy, to have more sustainable growth trajectory, a path for the future, we must have a diversified economy. That's why we always concentrated on holding this government to account on the sugar industry, which they have almost killed now. It's a pocket-sized industry, from 3.2 million tons down to 1.5 or 1.6 million tons. All other sectors it's only after the pandemic that suddenly, they're paying some lip service because they know that people have gone back. There's been a rise in the production, there's been an increase in exports, but our imports, still far outweigh the exports of our agriculture sector, which has huge potential. And there is a recent report, Sashi, by IFC, which talks about some of the binding constraints for the agriculture sector and why agriculture sector cannot pick up in the way that it should if we do not address those constraints. And I've highlighted that in Parliament. I've actually read those constraints in Parliament, during that motion.
Now, you just alluded to wastage. In the May sitting of Parliament, you called on the government to have an independent investigation into the quality of spending and wastage that have occurred over the years. You said in about 6 years, between 2015 and 2020, an average of about $500 million a year had been wasted. What was the basis of this wastage call on your part?
Well, Sachi, I've looked at very carefully all the budgets from 2015. I looked at the Auditor General's reports. I looked at the revised, budget figures. I've looked at the allocations for different projects, and then we've done our own assessment as to the effectiveness of those projects, the wastage, and you highlighted some of them before. And at the back of the envelope calculation, our estimate comes to the fact that on average, about $500 million a year has been wasted in inflated contracts, in terms of wastage which has not been taken care of, nepotism, corruption. So if you put all those ingredients together and see what has happened, and I'm saying, if the government doesn't believe those figures, of course they won't. They will not agree to any of our assessments in that way. That's fine. But I said, if you don't believe, let's have an independent audit. Let's have a quality audit. And in fact, Sachi, another important point I want to make is that when they removed me as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee through a motion in Parliament by changing the standing orders, they also changed the standing orders on the powers of the Public Accounts Committee. Now, there's a process. The Auditor General, which is an independent office, does the audit report, presents it to the Parliament. The Parliament then refers that report to the Public Accounts Committee, which is a bipartisan committee, and the Public Accounts Committee then scrutinizes that report and brings a report back to Parliament. Now, what they did in that amendment to the standing orders, they've reduced the Public Accounts Committee to almost nothing, because the Public Accounts Committee is prevented from looking at the value for money aspect of any spending. Now, in many countries, when you have big projects, the Public Accounts Committee actually comes on board right at the beginning of the project. They actually follow what's happening. It's too late, after the money has been spent and wasted for the Auditor General to come out and find out that, so many millions have been wasted. Public Accounts Committee in Fiji can't do that. Plus, Public Accounts Committee in Fiji cannot question policy. So, for example, I asked, when I was the chair, I said, I need an analysis of whether how much government was paying when government was actually buying vehicles, and how much is it paying now and spending when they're actually leasing vehicles from companies. Of course, I was removed after that. And then they brought that change, which said you can't question government's policy. If a policy itself is leading to wastage, then it's a job of the Public Accounts Committee, which is a parliamentary committee, a bipartisan committee, to look at where are we getting value for money. I mean, if you're spending, I mean, somebody told me, I don't have details of it, but somebody told me this example that if you give a contract for a contractor at $17 a meter to clean drain, on the side of the road, then that contractor who gets a contract for $17 gives it to another for $11, and the guy who got for $11 gives it to another for $5. So even the guy who actually finally does the work of cleaning 1 meter of drain still makes profit at $5. So you can imagine the wastage that would have taken place. And there are many examples of that that have been highlighted not only through the audit reports, but also through what we've seen, reported by people. And so unless you have an inquiry, unless you have an investigation, unless you have a government which is prepared to look at wastage, and unless you have a government which gives teeth to the Public Accounts Committee, you would never know the wastage. This is only an estimate that I'm making from the basis of what I understand has happened, in the last 7 years and every year in terms of the budget.
Now, while one can give you accolades for wanting to move in Parliament a motion for an independent investigation, surely you did not expect the Fiji First government to call an investigation into the quality of spending and wastage. It's like asking Dracula to be in charge of the blood bank.
I think you're absolutely right, Sashi. You put it pretty well.
All right, look, have a drink of water. I'll give you a little break. You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest today is the Honorable Professor Dhiman Prasad, Member of Parliament in Fiji and leader of the National Federation Party. Please like, follow, and share the SSTP page if you can. Professor Prasad, let me now address our trade union brothers and sisters and their plight. Union activities have been severely curtailed by the current government. What do you think is the future of the union movement in Fiji?
Well, to begin with, the assault on trade unions and workers in this country for the last 15 years by Frank Bainimarama and Fiji First, Frank Bainimarama government and the Fiji First government, Sashi, has been unprecedented and unparalleled, if I may say so, in Fiji's 52-year history. Unparalleled. No government ever had this kind of assault on the trade union movement in this country.
All right. Now, would you like to see unions being restored for effective bargaining processes? For example, the tripartite forum to be re-established in its truest sense?
Of course, Sasi, because in 2007, just after 2006 coup, they replaced the Trade Union Act with something called the Employment Relations Laws and what they call the ERP. And that was the start of the vigorous assault on trade union leaders and workers in this country. They unilaterally decided to reduce the retirement age from 60 to 55 in the civil service. Then in 2011, they had what we call the Essential National Industries Employment Decree, which is now an act. Again, it was all designed to stop trade union leaders and workers to effectively protest against the assault on their rights, and including on the bargaining rights. So, coming back to your question, Sashi, the tripartite forum was always fundamentally a very principled, acceptable forum, where employers, including government, trade unions, and private sector employers got together. So it was a tripartite forum, and it helped address the needs of the workers, but also created an environment of a labor market, a trade union or industrial relations climate, which was conducive for the adoption of economic policies and ensuring that workers, had all their rights, and therefore, they could discuss issues like productivity, issues like wages, salaries in an amicable manner. But despite all that, the workers were allowed the right to strike. The workers were allowed to march. We may have that in the law, in these draconian laws, permits to march and all that. But when you actually don't give a permit, I mean, the law doesn't make sense.
But coming back to the question, would you like to see these union rights restored? The effective
Absolutely.
bargaining process.
That is the first thing we will do in government. We will reestablish the tripartite forum. We will remove all the draconian laws which prohibit not only the trade union leaders but workers from exercising their rights, and we will ensure that we comply with the ILO standards and conventions that all governments in this country in the past have respected.
Now, it is common knowledge, and even blind Freddie can see that unions in Fiji have been denied their fundamental rights. You touched on this just a moment ago. The right to peaceful assembly, for instance, the right to have permits to march has not been granted. Do you think the current government is afraid of the support that such a march could harness from the general public? Is that a fear you think that the government has?
Precisely, Sashi, that's the fear they have. They don't want the workers to come out openly and say, look, this is what is happening to them. They don't want the workers to highlight the concerns not only to the employers but to the whole country. So they are actually afraid, and they've not allowed. FTUC has requested for permits to march on many occasions, and they have denied those permits on some very, very flimsy grounds, and sometimes they haven't given any reasons why the permits have not been allowed. But let me just say this, Sashi, on that. I mean, I give it to the trade union leaders. At least the union leaders are standing there. They have been denied their own rights. For example, they can't they can't become members of political parties. Attar Singh, for example, lost his union job twice because he had to resign to contest the election and become a political party member. The FTUC has on many occasions, I mean, they've tried to work with this government. But obviously, this is a government which is not interested in working with the trade union leaders and workers and respecting their rights.
You just took the words out of my mouth. You mentioned Attar Singh. So my question to you is regarding unionists' political rights. Unionists, as you say, have had to resign to contest the elections. Now, that sounds to be absolutely downright blatant bullying and trampling of unionists' rights. Will you, as part of a new government, if you do get in, will you restore those unionists' political rights?
Absolutely. Sashi, as I said, those are some of the first things that we will do in government, is to restore the workers' right, restore the trade union leaders' right, provide an environment, a conducive environment, as I said, reestablish the tripartite forum, and make sure that we work with the workers and the employers in this country so that, we can take the country forward.
Professor Prasad, I'm now going to seek your comments about the Fiji First Party, the ruling government. You have been in Parliament and have faced the Fiji First government. How would you rate the Fiji First Party in terms of its achievements since 2018 elections?
Well, you got to look at Fiji First Party and Fiji First government. In one word, their performance since 2014 as a government has been a disaster. If you look at, and when I say disaster, I don't say this lightly, Sashi. I will explain that if you don't mind. Why I say
Go
that the
ahead.
performance has been a disaster. If you look at the health services in this country, the worst ever in the history of this country. Whether you're talking about hospitals, whether you're talking about medical supplies, whether you're talking about equipments, people have been struggling to get the best medical services in this country, and it has not improved in the term of the Fiji First government. It was a mess, in some sense, even before that, although the former minister for health, Neil Sharma, tried his best, in the interim government. So that's one indicator. You look at the education system. So many reforms have taken place since 2014. Even before that, we've been calling for an education commission to look at what has happened, to look at all the changes, to look at how the quality has been impacted. But to no avail. It's been a disaster. You look at the infrastructure. You look at the amount of debt that this government has piled up in those, in the last 7 years. And look at the state of the economy, the state of the infrastructure, state of the sugar industry, state of the agriculture sector. And what we saw, if you put all that together, then and say, what does it come to? It comes to a disaster. And the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, actually exposed this government. In fact, it showed that they were hiding. They were concealing all the weaknesses and all the bad policies and the effect of those bad policies on the people. But COVID pandemic actually exposed them. People realized that government didn't have much. They had not managed the economy well. Our budgetary space was poor. Our hospital services were bad. And so, it's very clear that the performance of the Fiji First government over the last 7 years has been a disaster.
In the interest of transparency, I would like to assure our viewers that my invitation to the Fiji First government via its Attorney General and also to the Prime Minister's office is still standing. You've just heard Professor Prasad being very critical of the Fiji First government's performance over the last 4 years. And as I said, in the interest of transparency, I would welcome any member of the Fiji First government to come on this program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and to espouse your achievements so that the people of Fiji can hear it from the horse's mouth. And if you'd like to take part in this program, Fiji First Government, you know where you can contact me. Professor Prasad, moving on, as you know, the Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, has been making a tour of provincial councils. Now, you've come out strongly and criticized the Fiji First government as an arrogant and out-of-touch government about their claims regarding developments in Fiji. What was the basis of this criticism last night, I believe, yesterday?
Yeah, Chasi, it was simply in response to, sometimes when you hear the Prime Minister, he actually sounds like he's become an emperor of Fiji, where he goes into a meeting and says, look, I did this for Naitha City Provincial Council. I spent this amount of money. Any prime minister or any government, when they begin to say that, it's arrogance. It shows the lack of understanding of how government should operate. This is any government, anywhere spends taxpayers' funds. It's the people, and they work with them. You don't go out there and meet these people and say, I'm doing it, and they're doing it, and suddenly, the prime minister is everywhere. Opening all the provincial councils and saying, I've done this, and somebody gives him these figures of how much has been spent. What kind of nonsense is that? I mean, that's what I said, that, he should stop behaving like an emperor and be honest about the fact that every government, does a particular project. It's one way of flouting, campaign rules. They're campaigning out there saying, I'm doing it because the way the Fiji First Party operates, I didn't explain that when you asked the performance of the Fiji First Party. But if I have an opportunity, I can tell you what Fiji First Party is all about.
I will, with all due respect, come back to that. I've got a question to ask you on that. May I please move on? I'm
Sure.
definitely going to come back to that. Now, some guests on the SSTP program have said that for all intent and purpose, the Attorney General is at the helm of the country and the Prime Minister is just a figurehead, and that it is the Attorney General who is the de facto Prime Minister. What is your assessment on that?
Well, I said in Parliament that the de facto Prime Minister is in fact the Attorney General. And I said that the Prime Minister sometimes doesn't know that he's got a de facto Prime Minister. Because the Attorney General and the Minister for Economy, I mean, to his credit, he does most of the work. I mean, that's what I can see. And therefore, I call him a de facto Prime Minister because he provides all the answers to the opposition on any aspect of what's happening in government. Not the Prime Minister, not all the time, his ministers. It's the Attorney General. So I consider him to be the de facto, leader and Prime Minister of the country, not Frank Bainimarama.
Does it augur well for a country to have one man wielding so much of power and control?
Well, Shashi, I think the point that we've been making is that it's a two-man government. Of course, as I said, the Attorney General and the Minister for Economy, given all his portfolios, he does all the work. And as I said, to his credit, he does a lot of work. How he does it, whether it's effective, whether it's efficient, that's another issue, and I've got a lot to say on that. But the point is that this is a government which believes in dictatorship. And I've called this, I've said this before, it's a dictatorial government, it's a two-man government, and that's why things don't get done in a way that it should be done. That's why there is no transparency, there is no accountability on many of the things that we have asked questions on. And that's why you see that things are not done properly. And that's why people are losing. I mean, I get told stories of things that get stuck in the Attorney General, in the Minister for Economy's office. Everything, the buck stops with the Minister for Economy in many things. And therefore, things don't get done. And people at the end of the day suffer. That's the problem of a two-man government. When we come into government, we will run a cabinet government. We will run an inclusive government. We will let civil servants do their work. We will rely on good advice from senior civil servants. We will strengthen. We will restore back, a good, national planning office, which will provide, good considered research and analysis with evidence to ministers, so that the ministers themselves run their own ministry, not the way this government is doing it right now.
Now, you were trying to allude to this just a moment or so ago, and I will give you an opportunity now to address this. let me address the Fiji First Party itself. Now, apart from it being the Fiji First government, is it truly a political party? I mean, what sort of a political party is it? I've never heard of any AGM, for instance, being held of the Fiji First Party. I've seen the National Federation Party rally recently, your convention. I've seen the People's Alliance Party's convention, but I've never seen any such thing for the Fiji First Party. Please, what's your analysis on this?
That's correct, Sashi. I've never heard of a Fiji First meeting, party meeting, or a congress or whatever. But let me just say this. It'll be interesting. I don't know whether you've ever seen a copy of the Fiji First Party constitution, but I suggest that you get a hold of a copy of the Fiji First Party's constitution. And in section 5.3 of the Fiji First constitution, it defines who the foundation members are, and in fact, there are only 3 foundation members. It's Frank Bainimarama, Ayaz Sayed Qiyum, and the late Speaker of Parliament, who was a minister in the interim government. She was the founding president. She had to resign to become Speaker in the last Parliament. So the Fiji First Party, Sashi, if I can put it in this way, it's like the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, in some sense, it's worse than the Chinese Communist Party, because the Chinese Communist Party actually holds a congress every 5 years. They have the Central Committee, they have the Politburo, they have working committees. So in between those 5-year congress, these committees work. But the Fiji First Party doesn't have. I think they have a central committee. I've never heard of a Fiji First central committee meeting somewhere. So essentially, it's a two-man party, which translates into a two-man government. And the point that I want to make is, just like the Chinese Communist Party, where everybody in the country, whether you are a state company chairman, whether you are, everybody has to work for the Chinese Communist Party. Now, this is what the Fiji First Party and the government have done in this country. They have killed democracy at all levels. So, for example, there is no local government election. It's appointed by the government administrators. There is no growers' councils, all appointed by the government. There is no advisory council elected. They're appointed by government. The Tikina councils, Turangani Koros, provincial councils, these are all managed by the government. Just like the Chinese Communist Party, they have representatives in every civil servant, senior civil servants. They're made to behave like they are part of the Fiji First Party. So everything must work for the Fiji First Party. And we have seen that, Sashi, in the previous election. You have people like the CEO of FCCC, chairmen of boards, who are financiers of the Fiji First Party. These are all people out there campaigning for the Fiji First Party. So, you can't, these two guys go around the world, Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama and Attorney General Ayaz Sayed Qiyum, and say, 2013 Constitution has once given genuine democracy to this country. Here are two guys, who have done a party constitution, who have never held any meetings. There is no, they would have breached the political party's conduct legislation. There is a political party's decree. You wonder how they were registered in the first place, if they have a constitution of this nature. So what has happened, Sashi, is that there is no separation between the Fiji First Party, per se, and the Fiji First government. Everything seems to be one. And that is precisely the problem, and they have created this fear just like, if you are in a boat, you are thinking that you are working for the Fiji First Party. If you are a CEO of a company, government statutory body or independent institution, you might be thinking that, I have to work for the Fiji First Party. I have to work for Frank Bainimarama and Ayaz Sayed Kayum, because those are the only two founding members. Those are the only two people, as per the constitution, Sashi, who can become leaders. There is no, in the constitution, I can tell you, from what I've read in the constitution, there are only two people in that party now, if it is a party, who can become leaders, because that's what the constitution provides for. So they have no credibility to talk about any kind of genuine democracy in this country. This is quite shameful that you have people who go around the world, parade themselves as people who have brought about genuine democracy in this country, and yet they run a party which is worse than the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, you can't actually compare them to the Chinese Communist Party because at least the Chinese Communist Party, as you said, they hold their convention every 5 years. Now, I also believe that under the Fiji First Party constitution, these two, they have the powers to actually sack or discipline other members of the party. Would that be correct as well?
I think they have something in their constitution which allows for discipline, like all other parties. But if they are the only two people who control, who can be leaders, then obviously it translates into the fact that they can sack anybody anytime. Whatever process they might have using that. But the fact is that their constitution allows only these two people to become leaders.
All right. Well, I don't subscribe to any theories on, or what do you call it? It's funny. While you were talking about the Fiji First Party, the internet was having problems. Your voice was getting distorted. So I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories, so to say. But it's nice to know that you're nice and clear right now. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is the Honorable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament and leader of the National Federation Party. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends if you can. Don't forget to like and follow the SSTP page as well. Let me now turn to discussing some foreign policy matters with you, Professor Prasad. You question the Fiji government's silence about the Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Yi's visit to Fiji late last month, when it was reported that the Chinese minister would attend the second China-Pacific Island Foreign Ministers meeting. What were your concerns?
Shashi, all I said was everybody else kind of knew. We knew from other sources that the foreign minister was visiting Fiji. And so, obviously, as opposition leaders, we are always interested in, who's visiting Fiji, what sort of, discussions are going to take place. What are the things that is on the agenda? And given the sensitivities of power rivalry in the Pacific and the role of China in the Pacific, and given our own values of democracy, human rights, media freedom, transparency and accountability, and good governance, we are always concerned about, what sort of deal countries in the Pacific, including Fiji, are, working towards with not only China, but with other countries. And so it was a very natural, obvious question that we asked the government to be more transparent and accountable. And the Chinese, would like to keep things under the wrap. And we know the media complained at the media conference, they were not allowed to ask questions. So that's the kind of thing that we are always worried about.
Now, as we know, Beijing's engagement in the region in recent years has rapidly increased in the region, including its recent bilateral security agreement with the Solomon Islands. What implications does such an arrangement between China and the Solomon Islands have for Fiji?
Well, Shashi, there are a lot of analyses and a lot of takes on what might have led to that. How it came to that. What's the role of Australia, New Zealand, US, and other traditional partners? So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of leads as to why these things might happen and how China has been able to aggressively push its presence in the region. And there's always questions about their motivation. But that aside, I think for a long time the forum was a very united body, the Pacific Forum, which includes Australia and New Zealand, and some of these kinds of agreements, come through discussions within the forum. There are important, principles under which the forum leaders operate. Unfortunately, in the last several years, and since the coup in 2007, coup in 2006, and the way Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama has behaved, with respect to his own, posturing, in terms of foreign policy, and going to China and Australia, New Zealand, obviously, for good reasons, put sanctions, smart sanctions, had difficulty working with these people because they had usurped democracy. They did the coup, and that was the right thing for them to do. But more recently, the way in which Fiji has conducted its regional activities, first of all, nominating somebody from Fiji for the Foreign Secretary General's job, when it was very clear that the Micronesians were going to put up the candidate. They assumed that it was their turn. And so that led to a fracture in the forum, where obviously the Micronesians felt aggrieved and they threatened to pull out. Now there's been a strategy put in place, thanks to people like, the Prime Minister of Samoa, Fiame Mataafa, who's providing much more sensible leadership in the region right now than what we've seen in the past, and so they seem to be coming back. But one of the most important things that remains a sore point is the University of the South Pacific, and we talked about it last time, Sachi, the way in which Vice Chancellor Professor Paul Ahluwalia was deported by the Fiji authorities, and after his deportation, when the council has decided to put him back as Vice Chancellor and Samoa has hosted him, Fiji government, Mr. Bainimarama and Mr. Ayaz Sayed Kuyum continue to take the view that Fiji should not pay its dues to the University of the South Pacific. They owe more than $70 million now to the university. And as I said, the University of the South Pacific is a premier regional tertiary institution of repute, respected in every country in the region. And the council respects this vice chancellor. They had the wisdom, and thank God they had the wisdom, to not be bullied by Fiji and put back Paul Ahluwalia back as vice chancellor. Now, this government has been saying, after the BDO report was commissioned, which actually exposed the rot, which was the right thing for Paul Ahluwalia to do, to get their investigation done. The council decided that their investigation would be done. And when the BDO report came out and exposed the rot and exposed some of the crooks, this is a government, led by Ayaz Sayed Kuyum, tried to stop the release of the BDO report. That report has still not been made public because of the insistence from Fiji. That report should be made public. People must know what was in the report. But after that, this government wanted Paul Ahluwalia to be investigated. And there have been 5 investigations. And all of them have cleared this man. And yet, Fiji government refuses to hold back the funding to the University of the South Pacific. That's shameful. In fact, the budget had the allocation. In fact, in the last revised budget, they removed it completely. But before that, there was an allocation. It was approved by Parliament. So in fact, it's criminal for the government to actually hold the budget which was approved by Parliament for the University of the South Pacific. Now, that remains a sore point in our regional relationship. And unless, and the quicker this government wakes up, and restores the grants to the university, they are punishing all the students in the region. They are punishing the academics. They are destroying the university, which has been built, since 1968. And in fact, it was the National Federation Party, you recall, Sashi, that actually mooted this idea of a university here. And as a party, we will not allow anyone in this country, including this government, this arrogant government, to blackmail the University of the South Pacific and to destroy an institution, which has been built over so many years, by the region, by countries like Australia and New Zealand, by the taxpayers of those countries, and many others who have contributed. So, to restore regional unity, to restore regional, solidarity, so that the region as a whole, puts up a policy, a foreign policy agenda. When we talk about whether it's Indo-Pacific strategy, whether it's China strategy, whether it's any other strategy, that the region comes together and there is consultation and dialogue as to how it should be done. That is the right way to go. That's the Pacific way, which every Fijian leader before Frank Bainimarama respected them. And he better learn from the experiences of those prime ministers in the past.
Okay. Staying with foreign policy, the Albanese Labour government is now in power in Australia. What does this mean for Fiji's bilateral relations with Australia?
Well, we actually welcome the Albanese government, and we are very happy that the Foreign Minister Penny Wong, so soon after her appointment, visited Fiji and had some good discussion. Although we would have, as an opposition, we would have liked to meet her as well. Perhaps it was a short visit, and we understand that. But we like the emphasis that the Albanese government is putting on it, in terms of its relationship with the Pacific, putting the issue of climate change on the agenda. But also, I think, if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy and the leaders of the US, Japan, Australia, and India, and President Biden himself, has been putting a lot of emphasis on democracy, on human rights, and good governance. And I hope that the Albanese government will pay more attention, not only to the electoral process and what's happening here and in the politics and the geopolitics strategy, but also how good governance, how democracy, how respect for human rights can support, good climate policy, good climate justice, because you can't be talking about, just climate change, in isolation of good governance, of transparency and accountability, because for the Pacific, the emphasis on climate change is about adaptation. Not so much on mitigation. I mean, we are small players in the whole area of mitigation. Adaptation is going to be a big issue. It has to have a big strategy. And when you look at adaptation, you look at hundreds and millions or billions of dollars in building climate resilience infrastructure, climate resilient policies to deal with those kind of emergencies, and that requires a government, or will require governments which are based on fundamental principles of democracy, accountability, human rights. And so any government in Australia or New Zealand or anywhere, which puts climate change as a key item on the agenda, must combine that and put that together with this overall strategy of governance, which stems from having good democracy. And we know that democracy has been declining in the Pacific. Of course, it's been declining worldwide, but in the Pacific as well. And we must not allow it to slide backwards more, because that's going to define what the Pacific is going to be. That's what is going to separate us from countries which do not believe in that. And that will allow us to deal with those countries whose values are at odds with us in the Pacific and what they want to do in the Pacific, including China.
The Albanese government is, of course, a Labour government. What does this mean for the union movement in Fiji?
Well, one would hope that, the good thing, Sachi, is that the Fiji First government won't be there very soon. So if the next government is there, we are there, we will restore the trade union rights in this country in a big way. We're going to repeal all those draconian laws. But in the meantime, we expect Albanese government to take note of what has happened in Fiji over the last 15 years with respect to the assault on trade union leaders and workers and their rights.
All right, I'm now going to shift our discussion to party politics. When we first spoke to you in December 2021, there was no alliance between the National Federation Party and the People's Alliance. Obviously, you have now signed the Memorandum of Understanding between your two parties. What are your views on the People's Alliance and the NFP post-election coalition? What is the partnership all about?
Shashi, you said one very important word in there. Thank you for that. It's a post-election alliance.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the same because the system, the electoral system, doesn't allow a pre-election coalition. There are no constituencies. It's a single national constituency. It's based on proportional representation. So NFP is going to fight for every single vote in the country. We are going to field 55 candidates. So will the People's Alliance. They will field the 55 candidates. They will fight for every single vote. This agreement, this memorandum of understanding that we have signed, is about how we are going to form the government or after the election. And what the Memorandum of Understanding says is that whatever the results, whatever the seats the People Alliance wins, whatever the seats the NFP wins, the two will form the next government. And that's the message. And the reason why we've done that, Sachi, is because we want to be honest with our voters. We want to be very transparent and say right at the outset. We want, and the reason why we've said it well before the election is we want people to discuss this. Of course, some people will say, our opponents are saying it's not a good idea. Some are, sitting outside, of this country and pontificating about, what should happen and what should not happen. Well, what we are doing is we are just being very honest, transparent, and open about our options after the election. And we want the people to know that this alliance is a post-election alliance, and our memorandum of understanding is based on some fundamental principles. For example, what is going to be our vision? And let me just read the three. Sachi, if you give me the time to do so, I'll quickly read those three. We share a vision for our collective future, believing in democracy, the rule of law, good governance, and human rights. 2, the power of the people of Fiji to work together to build and improve each other's lives, supported by and not directed by the government. Pride in Fiji's ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity, and the ability to put our different abilities and strengths to work for the good of all the Fijians. Just some examples of our vision in the agreement, and there are many, another 7 that we have in the memorandum of understanding, which lays down fundamentally the main difference between the style of the Fiji First government, the Fiji First party, and the style of government that the People's Alliance and the NFP will run after the election. That's why this agreement is very, very important. It's a post-election agreement. So let me repeat. Before the election, we're going to fight for every single vote. Of course, we will appear together. We will help each other. We will discuss policies that we need to converge on. There will be differences. But these are all the ingredients of a political process when 2 political parties and 2 political leaders decide to work together. That's the memorandum of understanding, Shashi.
All right, now people have questioned why such a partnership. Your critics say that you have designated yourself to only a deputy prime minister role in this post-election alliance should you and the PEP be victorious. What are your comments to that?
Shashi, we have looked at the electoral system. We have looked at our electoral success in the last 2 elections. We are making a political judgment based on our experience in the last 2 elections. We are basing our political judgment on the basis of the state of the 2 parties, the support that the 2 parties are getting at the moment. We've done our own assessment, and it's based on a very pragmatic, a very good understanding of what the possible outcomes could be after the election. And on the basis of that, we are accepting, certain, ways in which the government is going to be formed and who might be what in that post-election government. So it's a very pragmatic process through which we are articulating these views so that people don't get the wrong impression. Because our critics, of course, our critics will say, why you want to be a deputy prime minister? Nobody's talked about me becoming a deputy prime minister. I have not said that. But that's up to the people. What we are focused right now, Shashi, is winning the election. The People's Alliance and NFP are focused on winning the election, winning every single vote, and forming a government. And people like what we've done throughout the country. Australia and New Zealand, people are coming to us. People can now see an alternative. People now have a real choice. They have a real choice. They know that this is going to be the government. Some, who are sitting on the fence are also beginning to move towards us because they can see a government. They can see a philosophy. They can see a vision. They can see that there are 2 leaders who are willing to look forward and not go back and look back 35 years ago or 20 years ago. So that's the choice we are providing to the people, and we are being honest about it. Of course, we expect people to be critical of it. We expect some people to never support it. That's fine, but we are offering an alternative with a very clear vision. And that's what matters to the people. Because the people in this country are fed up. They want to see an alternative government, and they can see an alternative government with the PA and the NFP. But we've also, in our memorandum of understanding, we have left room for any other opposition political parties post-election, or even now if they want to come and sign on this, there is still room for that.
I'm going to come to that. I'm going to come to that in a moment.
Yeah.
But I have a question. In the event that the People's Alliance win by an absolute majority, will there be a need for Sitiveni Rambuka to include the National Federation Party in the formation of the new government? Are you confident the proposed alliance will stand the test of time?
Shashi, as I said, this memorandum of understanding is very clear. We have said that we are going to form government together. As long as between the two of us we have the majority, we're going to form the government.
Okay.
If one party, if the People's Alliance, forms a government in its own right, if it has the numbers in its own right, my understanding is, my expectation is that our memorandum of understanding is very clear. It says that whatever the result, we will form the government together. But
Okay.
the fact is, and that is why we are saying that we will also work for every single vote for our party, as will the People's Alliance. So, yes, I mean, that's the MOU. And I have no doubt that whatever the numbers each party has, that the government will be the People's Alliance and the NFP together.
Now, Professor Prasad, you are on record as saying, and I quote, "I trust Mr. Rambuka, and Mr. Rambuka trusts me and the National Federation Party. Mr. Jairam Reddy told me in 1999, when I asked him, why are you going with Rambuka? And he said, because I trust the man." End of quote. Is this trust that you have based on Mr. Jairam Reddy's proclamation, or have you your own sense of a degree of trust in Mr. Rambuka?
Well, it's both. Sashi, a part is what I saw. In fact, people forget that I also fought an election in 1999. I campaigned with Sitiveni Rambuka in Vanua Levu. We gave speeches together. So I have a history of knowing him closely since 1999. And more recently, we have worked together in Parliament when he was the leader of the opposition after the 2018 election. And we had joint tours. We've talked on important national issues, important economic issues. We've talked about his own history. He knows, my opposition to the 1987 coup. He knows my opposition to all the coups. But we also know that the NFP has worked with him since 1992 to formulate the 1997 constitution, and it was a constitution that was delivered against all the odds by the mere sincerity and the ability to work together, and that was Sitiveni Rambuka and Jairam Reddy. So apart from those experiences that I had personally with him since 1999, but more recently when he's been the leader of the opposition. And look, the NFP's position has never changed. We've never supported a coup. We will never support a coup. What I said in 2014 was in the context of what Frank Bainimarama was saying about, coup leaders. Of course, politicians, we make statements at a particular point in time in a particular context. And right now, not only in terms of history, but in terms of my own experience with Rambuka, yes, I have seen, I have understood that I can work with the man and we can take this country forward together. And that's what people want. That's what people are looking for. That's what people are saying to us. And this agreement that we have signed is good news. Good news for a lot of people in this country who are looking for an option, who are looking for an alternative government. And I'm happy, Sashi, I'm happy and glad that we are providing this option. and I'm confident, and I'm actually quite relaxed that we will together form the next government.
All right, now, one question that comes to mind, Professor Prasad, is that if the People's Alliance and the NFP have sufficient numbers to form government, why would the two parties need other parties? Is it not a case of too many cooks spoils the masala curry, so to say?
Yeah. Shashi, that's something that we will cross when we are there. But our philosophy, as we have said, our vision is to unite the country, is to bring the people together, and Mr. Rambuka, understands this very well. That when we get into government, we will. It will not be a time to talk about division. It will be a time to talk about uniting people. And if we feel, and then there are some good people out there. If we feel that we need to work with other political parties, there'll be a lot of things to do. Not only in government but in parliament, in committees, and we want to restore that parliamentary confidence. We want to restore that culture of cross-party discussion, cross-party agreement on laws and legislation. So we want to change the whole culture. We want to put up a style of government, a style of parliament that people will like to be in politics. That there will be no room for any other alternative, but to have a democratic government through a electoral process. So yes, I mean we will be open to the idea of working. And I said, and I'm on record, we will also treat the opposition with respect, because in a democracy, the opposition is as important as the government. Unfortunately, unfortunately, this government has not understood that, because they came into power through a barrel of a gun. They remain dictators. They can't see an alternative. They can't talk about policies with the opposition parties. They have actually squeezed the opposition parties. They changed the funding formula. We don't have the NFP doesn't even have a decent office in parliament. I'm sitting in my office right now, Sachi. If we didn't have this office, I would be doing everything from home. This is the way that this government has treated the opposition. And so the point is that we in government, our job would be to unite the country, and we will do that. We will do that with all sincerity and honesty.
Talking about involving other parties in your coalition, the Unity Fiji Party leader says he was not invited in this partnership. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, I hope, Sachi, he was not misquoted. I would like, because if that's what he said, then that was a lie. I know that I've worked with the leader of the Unity Fiji Party even before he formed the Unity Party in 2014. We wanted him to join us or any other party, because we knew at that point in time that that those votes could be very crucial, and it was the case. I mean, and we were happy to. We had a number of negotiations with Mr. Narube, and I know more recently, both people from PA and people from NFP. I don't know where that came from, but that's absolutely not true.
All right,
as I said, the MOU is still open. MOU itself is an invitation.
All right, I will address that question with the Unity Fiji Party leader in the weeks to come, because he will be reappearing on this program sometime in the very near future. Now, in the same token, the Fiji Labour Party leader says it's the same thing as 1999, and that you have gone back on your word about military rule. Care to explain?
Well, Mr. Chaudhary should be the last person to comment on something like that, because, as I said, our position against the military rule has always been consistent. The FP was in government. It was NFP Labour government that was overthrown by Mr. Rambuka in 1987. Jairam Reddy and Harish Sharma were key NFP leaders who were in the government. Harish Sharma was Deputy Prime Minister, Jairam Reddy was Attorney General. We opposed the 2000 coup. In fact, NFP was at the forefront when the People's Coalition government was held hostage. We opposed strongly the 2006 coup. The NFP refused to be part of any process after the 2006 coup. But everybody knows that Mr. Chaudhary jumped into bed with Bainimarama and became Minister for Finance straight away. Our association with Sitiveni Rambuka goes back to 1994. Yes, we have not forgotten 1987. But we also know that Rambuka worked with Jairam Reddy from 1994 to give 1997 constitution. We fought the election in 99. Both of them lost, accepted the results. Rambuka fought again in 2018, lost. He didn't become Prime Minister, remained leader of the opposition. And so NFP's position has always been consistent and principled, that we have never supported, we've never been part of a military government, like some other people, who are now caring to lecture others. This is, as I said, a very pragmatic, a very forward-looking, alliance, and a choice that we are giving to the people of Fiji that they've been longing for, that the alternative that they wanted to see, and we have provided them. There is absolutely no inconsistency with what with the party's position with respect to military rule in this country and this alliance that we have with the People's Alliance. We are not only looking at, when we look at the People's Alliance, Sashi, it's not just Mr. Rambuka. People's Alliance has some very, very good people. We know who are the candidates. Some of them have been announced. These are some very, very principled, progressive, well-qualified, people. People who've been Democrats. People like Manoa. People like Linda. People like Ditoka, and many others that I know who are there, who are well-meaning people, who want good for this country. And so this alliance is not just about Mr. Rambuka, which our critics would like to make it to. Of course, Mr. Rambuka is a very popular leader, by any standards, and that is what these. And I know why they're criticizing us, some of them, because their political fortune is tied to the fact that they need to criticize this alliance, because they know that this alliance is a choice that people wanted. And we read the signal, we read the request. People were saying to us even before we signed this, that we need to work together, we need to give them an alternative, and that's what we've done. And there are a lot of things that I can say about those who want to criticize us, and criticize me and Mr. Rambuka about their own past. But I won't go there now, Sashi, and I hope that they will focus on the Fiji First Party and the mess that they have made of this country. It's no point talking about Biman Prasad, talking about NFP in 1977, talking about NFP in 87. Let's look at, people are suffering in this country. People are without jobs. People are living in poverty. People want to look to the future. People are leaving this country because they don't see any hope. But now, what we have done, Sashi, is provided that hope. We are providing that hope. We are providing an alternative. And that's why some of them are worried. That's why instead of focusing on Fiji first and all the bad policies, they are focusing on Biman Prasad. And what we are trying to do.
You finished?
I've finished it.
All right.
I have more to say about all these things, but I'll leave it there today.
No, but my point is, I take your point. You were defending yourself. Don't you think, given the scenario that has been in existence in Fiji for the last 16 years, that opposition parties should at least try to stop throwing mud at each other, to have a concerted effort of joining forces and then having a realistic expectation to change the government? I mean, let us not forget, so far we've got something like 9 registered political parties in Fiji. What are your thoughts on that?
Precisely, Sashi. I think I agree with you absolutely that let's not start throwing mud to each other. That's what I said before. I said there is a mess in this country that we need to talk about how we can get out. And you're absolutely right. I mean, people have to understand that the People's Alliance and the NFP are focused on winning the election and forming a government on the principles that we've espoused in our memorandum of understanding, with a vision. We're providing, and we are saying that that's our focus. I'm not going to bother about what other parties are doing right now, but our focus is on winning a government and providing hope to the people.
Let me put to you another scenario. Right now, all the talk about is about the People's Alliance and the National Federation Party. Now, there's also talk of possible alliance between SODELPA and the Unity Fiji Party getting together. Now, the million-dollar question that I have, assuming the election results are too close, what is stopping a smaller party that manages to cross the threshold to form an alliance with the Fiji First Party? Is that not a real possibility?
Well, one of them has already said that he will work with any other party except Fiji First. Savanada Narube has made that very clear. I hope others will make their positions clear, as we have. But it's up to you, Sashi, to ask them what they will do. I don't want to speculate, what other political parties will do. But at least, Savanana Narube has made that very clear, that he will not go with Fiji First. I think you have to ask the others.
Well, rather than me asking the others, what would you say to any smaller party that was considering in their mind to join the Fiji First Party post-election? What would you say to them if they got over the threshold? What would your message be to them?
Shashi, even before that, let me just get you back to our memorandum of understanding. We are saying that the memorandum of understanding still provides a room for any opposition party, which feels that they need to come with us, on a vision that we have, the values on which we've espoused in the memorandum of understanding. We are open to it. That's the message that I want to give to all other opposition parties, and I'll leave it there.
All right, you are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is the Honorable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament and leader of the National Federation Party. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends. And I remind you that if you'd like to watch this program in its entirety at some later time, you can do so either on Facebook or on YouTube as well. Simply go and type in Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and you'll have all the programs of the past that you can view at your own discretion, at your own leisure. Professor Prasad, as we head to the home stretch, these questions should not be that detailed, I think. Let, let me take this opportunity to talk about the National Federation Party. Standing alone, do you think the NFP can get over the threshold?
Well, that's really a no-brainer for us, Sashi. We're confident that we're going to make the threshold in 2014. We did. We got more votes in 2018 than we had in 2014. I can say to you with absolute confidence that NFP, we're not just talking about threshold anymore. Threshold is not an issue for us. We're talking about the maximum number of seats that we want to win, and our focus is that. So threshold is not even a question that we need to worry about.
It's a very positive outlook. Congratulations for that. Now, when is the NFP formally announcing its candidates?
Shashi, we had a large number of applications, more than 100. Our selection committee has done an excellent job. They've interviewed most of the shortlisted candidates. We still have more than 55 people on the shortlist, some very, very good people with diverse skills and capabilities. And so the management board of the party would be meeting very soon. And once the management board has met and endorsed the candidates, the proposed candidates, we will then be announcing them as soon as possible after that. So it's all in the pipeline.
All right. And when is the NFP manifesto likely to be released?
Well, NFP, Sashi, as you know, we've talked about manifestos and this whole draconian law about manifestos, and we discussed it last time. We will keep that under wraps. We're assessing the timing of the election. You know, we will tell the people at an appropriate time. We will not be like Fiji Fest. I mean, before 2018 election, we started announcing our policies in 2017. The Fiji Fest party, they brought their manifesto out, I think, 2 or 3 days before the election, and it was just a big lift out in the favorite newspaper, Fiji Sun. That was it. NFP subjected itself to a thorough scrutiny and review of his manifestos. We subjected to all the lies and the deceit by the Fiji Fest party during that election. So we've learned some lessons from that election, and we've learned some of the tricks and the deceit and the lies that are in store within the Fiji Fest arsenal. So we'll have to be careful when we come up with our manifesto, mindful of the draconian law that governs the determination of manifesto and the costing and who and how we are able to do that.
Now, would that be the strategy that Mr. Rambuka was addressing during the press conference last Friday when he said the People's Alliance Manifesto will be strategically released? Would that be the strategy?
I think they have their own strategy, and I'm sure Mr. Rambuka is very, very mindful, like me, what's in store in terms of the law. And as I said, Sachi, draconian these laws as they may be, but we have to work within those laws to be able to be in the race or remain in the race. I mean, this is a government, the Fiji Fest party. They would do everything to put us out of the race, if they can. So we have to be very, very careful with respect to the laws and how we campaign and how we adhere to the law. We understand that.
Let me also take this opportunity to discuss the Honorable Professor Biman Prasad. Let me say, you've made a lot of sacrifices to be in politics. You have left a lucrative academic university career, and made huge financial sacrifice to be in the political arena. In the nasty game of politics, you will realize you get acclaim, abuse, and ridicule as well. What is your motivation to remain in the political arena?
First of all, Sashi, before the motivation, I don't want to brag about the fact that, I know people say that I've sacrificed so much. That's a choice I've made, and I have to live with that. But my real motivation to get into politics, I contested election in 1999 when I just come back with my PhD, and I was moving up my academic ladder, and I decided, because I believe that politics can be a force for good. Politics can be difficult. It's not easy, especially when you have a dictatorship all around you, when you have draconian laws. So it's not easy, and I knew that. But my motivation is that Fiji is a great country. We can't let two people destroy it in the way that they have done, and it's a responsibility that some of us have taken. And there are many people out there who are not in politics. Many women, brave women, in this country, like Shamima Ali, Shashi Kiran, and many others out there. People like Meraseni, Rakuta, who happened to be in the Fiji First Party, who I used to talk. Always meant good, about what she wanted to do for the country. So it's not just politicians. So for me, the motivation was to bring this country back to a position where we can live well, where we can work together, where we're not dictated by a government which doesn't believe in people's rights, to dissent, to provide criticism. So my motivation really was to bring about a change, and that's why I got into politics. As you said, it's not easy. It's not you get acclaim, you get ridicule, but that's part of the process through which you have to go through if you want to bring about change in the country, and that's what I've set out to do. And as long as I'm in politics, that would be my motivation.
We've spoken about your motivation. Let me ask you now, what is your one legacy that you will leave behind that you will be very proud of when you ultimately finish from politics?
Well,
or is that yet to be realized, that legacy?
Well, I don't know about. I don't personally believe in this idea of legacy. Legacies can be good or bad, but at least when I leave politics, I can look back and say that I offered myself. I put myself out there to save the people, and I think saving the people requires sacrifice. Philosophically speaking, Shashi, you can't save the people if you don't believe in personal sacrifice. So leaving a job, a well-paid job, leaving your family time, doing all that, these are not great sacrifices, but they are essential. They are essential if you want to save the people, and so I believe that saving the people is a higher calling. It's what a lot of people feel, very late in their life, that they should have done. Sometimes they miss out, and I did not want to miss out saving the people, because I always believe that saving the people is a higher calling, and something that we all strive to do in different ways. It's not just politics, but politics, as I said, is a force for good. Politics determines a lot of things. Unfortunately, uh, sometimes politics determines what you have for breakfast, because the policies that politicians make, the parliament, the laws that they pass, the governments that that determine policies, can have either a good impact or devastating impact on people's life. And when you have bad governments, when you have bad policies, when you have bad laws, people suffer. And so politics is important. And I've always believed that politics can be a force for good. It should be a force for good. And that's why I'm motivated to be in politics, and I will do my best as long as I'm in it.
Regrets. Are there any regrets in your political life so far? Do you have any?
Well, the only regret that I have, Sashi, is because when I got into politics in 2014 and I got into parliament, I was actually expecting a lot of good sense from the people who had actually won. People who had come to power through the barrel of the gun. Who and have stayed in power. I thought they would have learned a lesson, that they would be more willing to work with the opposition to provide the environment. Unfortunately, I was very wrong to believe that there will be, because in 2014, when I got into the election, I knew that we may not be able to get into government, but I still believe that the parliamentary system, government, coming out of the electoral process, will respect. So that's my huge regret, and to see that Frank Bainimarama and Ayaz Sayed Kayum did not take that opportunity in the way that they should have.
Professor Prasad, with 2020 hindsight, if you could change anything from your past political life, what would that be and why would you change it?
Well, Shashi, the thing that I mean, look, as I said, I was perhaps uh, too trusting in the the electoral process, and the ability for those in power to do good, and the ability of those in power to leave power, and to create an environment where they could lose power. Unfortunately, it's not something that I should have trusted. So going forward in the future, I could be less trusting uh, about the ability of those who get into power, even through a electoral process, to try and leave power, and create even a better environment for others to do so. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but um, that's what I think at this stage.
One of our viewers just put a comment: be people's person. My next question is, who do you see as the biggest political threat or challenge in Fiji?
Well, I mean, I see the biggest threat to this country, the continuation of the Fiji First party into power. So that's the biggest political threat. For good governance, for democracy, and for good economic policies. And so that's the biggest threat. And the people, I think, Shashi, understand that. That's why that they're going to vote this Fiji First Party government out of power.
Now, what would you say to Bai and Kai, who have said that you are hungry for power and would get in bed with Rambuka?
This is coming from two men. This is coming from two men who who's who, who undertook, who went through a naked grave for power through the barrel of the gun and remained in power for 7 years until they put out their own constitution, forced a constitution, kept all those draconian laws, and have tried to remain in power through that process. And they have the audacity, or they have the it's a sick joke that they are creating by saying that I'm trying to for me it's all about power. I mean, they should look at themselves in the mirror and say to themselves that we are a bunch of people that grab power through the barrel of the gun, and that we want to remain in power through all devious means. That's what they're trying to do. I've come through an electoral process. I've come with a motivation to save the people. I've come with a motivation to change or to clean the mess that they've created in this country in the last 15 years. So that describes them well.
All right. Well, in the same token, do you think with the current crop of political parties, and I said there's 9 right now, do you think that Bai and Kai are likely to get in bed with anyone should the results get too close?
I won't be surprised at all if they do everything possible to negotiate with anyone to remain in power. It won't be a surprise.
You think that's when the real sweetness will come out?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think they will not be even in a negotiating position after the next election.
Okay, then talking about the next elections, how confident are you and how much faith do you have in the electoral process currently in place?
Shashi, look, I have to be very careful what I say about some of the laws and some of the processes, and perhaps people who are in charge of the elections. There are laws that are out there that govern perhaps what we can say and what we can't say. But as far as the National Federation Party is concerned, we are working with the elections office. People are attending all the meetings. We are trying to follow and understand all the processes. We are following the laws very carefully, and we are looking at all the processes also very carefully, and we would be very, very vigilant in our strategy, in our own party processes to ensure that the election is free and fair. But more importantly than the electoral process or the laws, Sashi, is the ability of the Fiji First Party. In fact, sometimes I feel that the laws actually don't apply to them. If you just look at the political party funding laws, I mean, Fiji First Party, they don't, Sayed Kayum is on record to say we don't organize fundraising dinners or whatever. Of course, he doesn't have to, because all he can do is cobble up, 40 or 50 people, a group of business people, and people who benefited from government contracts, people who are sitting on boards. You couple them together, and the two leaders of the Fiji First Party, get there, and they get all the commitment. I mean, I'm told, I don't have the details, but I was told that 2 weeks ago, 40 businessmen met at somebody's place, and the Prime Minister and the Attorney General were there. I don't know how far that's true, but that's what we are told. And I know in 2018, that's what they did. They call a group of people businessmen and get pledges and they get their donations. We also know that in 2018, one businessman gave 50,000 under the name of everyone in his family, and then got probably another 40 or 50,000 under the name of the employees. So this is a party which has been flouting, the laws, and I'm sure, and if it is investigated properly and thoroughly, it will be shown that they are actually flouting the law. So that the environment and the environment for the election has to be free and fair, has to be a level playing field. And we talked about earlier, Shashi, how Fiji First Party is already within the campaign period. The campaign rules have kicked in on the 26th of April. Yet they are using all the state resources to go out there, assemble people, and campaign. They don't call it a political campaign. They say, oh, I'm not here to campaign, but everything they say about is campaign. So that is a more worrying scenario and a more worrying trend right now for us in the opposition parties. And we are saying to the government, stop this nonsense. Have some respect for the electoral process and the laws that you put in yourself. Respect those laws. That's what we are saying.
Well, it seems the laws apply to some, and then it doesn't apply to others. And it's a sad indictment that opposition parties have to walk on eggshells just to make sure that they do not fall prey to the draconian laws put in place. Now, let's move to something far more pleasant. You were recently in Sydney, and so was Mr. Sitiveni Rambuka. How successful a trip was it for you?
Well, it was an absolute success by all measures and by all standards, Sashi. I think both Mr. Rambuka and I received a very warm reception, from the two engagements that we had together. One at the temple in Liverpool, and the other one, of course, was the ball. So I was very, very pleased with the support, with the enthusiasm that I saw amongst the diaspora, and it was an opportunity for us to thank the people there, people like yourselves, living in Sydney, and everybody else, for helping our people during the pandemic, and they continue to help. So it was an absolute success.
What did you think of the People's Alliance ball that was organized? You were a guest at that ball.
Well, as I said, it was just an absolute success, and I think the people who organized it, did a fantastic job, and I'm sure the People's Alliance would have raised, substantial amount of money just by looking at the number of people, and I'm told that all the tickets were sold out. But apart from that, the mood of the people, the hunger for change back in their home, hunger for change in a government was evident throughout the evening, and all the people that I talked to, many of the people who left, and many of the ETOK people who left this country, left after 2006 coup, and it was quite sad to talk to so many of them who very, very good people. I mean, it's the same as people who left after 87, people who left after 2000, and people who left after 2006 coup. They all feel Fiji in their heart and minds. They all want to see good in this country, and therefore I think the hunger for change was evident all throughout that evening.
Is the National Federation Party planning any major fundraising events overseas Are you thinking of coming back to Australia? And if so, would you be going to other states like Brisbane, to Victoria, in Melbourne, etc.?
Well, we think you guys have a lot of money out there, Shashi. So we can. Yeah, would love to. Would love to. I mean, as I said, we for us the environment here in Fiji and the laws governing fundraising is quite difficult and draconian. So we have to be very very careful about how we do that. But we are looking for support. We urge all our supporters to support us. All our former Fiji citizens, living in Australia, New Zealand, and other countries can contribute. I mean, there are laws governing that, but we invite people, if they believe in a change in Fiji, if they believe in NFP and what we stand for, and the prospect of the People's Alliance and NFP in government. I invite people to support us financially.
All right. When do I expect to see your good self and Mr. Rambuka make a joint appearance on SSTP to espouse your alliance and respective party platforms and to discuss current matters that affect all Fijians?
Shashi, I'm sure both Mr. Rambuka and I would be very happy to appear on your show again and talk about the memorandum of understanding. As I said, this is a fantastic, platform that you are providing. It's a great service, I think, that you are providing, to the people of Fiji and those who are interested in bringing about good to this country and bringing about change. And change, I think, is inevitable this time. And all we need is, support from good people. And you are an absolute an example of somebody who has Fiji in his heart and mind, and that you're providing this unbiased platform for us to espouse our policies and our views about what's happening in this country. So I thank you very much, and we would be very happy to appear as you wish at a time that is convenient to both me and Mr. Rambuka.
Thank you for those very kind words. And at this juncture, I must, for the sake of transparency, say that my invitation to the Fiji First government stands. I have invited the Attorney General and also the Prime Minister through his office. I've not received any response, and they're welcome to take part in this show if they want to. Now, I will leave you to coordinate with Mr. Rambuka your two agendas, and perhaps you can let me know at a later stage when you two gentlemen are ready. Professor Prasad, I now invite you to make your closing statements to the viewers this afternoon.
Well, Shashi, all I want to say to all our viewers and people of Fiji and those who have Fiji in their heart and mind is that we have set ourselves to provide a government which will bring our people together, which will create an environment so that we can all live well and live together. We have set out a very clear vision of an inclusive government, and we will do everything between now and the election to convince all our people that the partnership that we have got with the People's Alliance and the NFP is a real choice, for the people of this country. It's a real alternative to a two-man government that we've seen in the last 7.5 years, and the change that is needed is going to come, and I invite all of you to join us, to join in our vision to bring this country back to a glory where people can feel confident, where people can trust the government, where people can enjoy the fruits of prosperity, and where we can set a path to sustainable economic, political, and social development in this country.
Professor Biman Prasad, Dhanyavad, a big Vinaka Vakalevu to you. Thank you very much for being chief guest in Sashi Singh's Talking Point today. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you as chief guest, and I thank you for your frank views and responses to my questions, and not only for today, but also for last week, and for agreeing to come back today. I know you've had a very busy agenda back home. Now, I also take this opportunity in wishing you and the National Federation Party all the very best in the forthcoming elections. Let me tell you that SSTP extends an invitation to the National Federation Party to suggest names of your provisional candidates in the future so that I may get an opportunity to interview some of them. Is that possible, sir?
That's entirely possible, Sashi.
Thank you. And by the way, SSTP will be following the Fiji general elections very closely, and we shall also be keeping an eye out for the results of all our chief guests, particularly who have participated in the SSTP programs. We hope that on that night, we will be able to speak to you on election night, as we will be live. What do you say to that? Will you make yourself available?
Sashi, I think that's possible, depending on where we are on the day and how things move on. But yes, would be happy to say a few things on an election night.
All right. Well, Professor Prasad, thank you very much. Wonderful to have you once again, and wishing you a very blessed Sunday. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Shashi, and pleasure to talk to you.
Cheers now. Thank you. And to all our viewers, thank you very, very much indeed. You've taken your precious time to be with us right for the duration of the program. SSTP, we ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. As I say, Fijians want to know. Well, that's all for episode 23, and what an episode it has been. Part 1 last week, and part 2 just concluding a moment or so ago. A very, very big thank you to my regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, for his input in the program today. To my SSTP team, a very big thank you as well. Without you, it won't be possible. And our chief guest for episode 24 next week. We should have a drum roll, I think, each time I introduce a chief guest. Well, our chief guest for episode 24 next week on Sunday, 26 June 2022, will be Dr. Chalesi Nakarawa, Doctor of Philosophy in Law and the People's Alliance Party provisional candidate. There is a lot to discuss with Dr. Chalesi Nakarawa in next week's program. So don't forget, we will meet you next Sunday at 11 a.m. Sydney time, 1 p.m. Fiji time and New Zealand, and at 6 p.m. on Saturday in Los Angeles and San Francisco, when our chief guest will be Dr. Chalesi Nakarawa. If you have any questions for Dr. Nakarawa, you can privately message me on the SSTP page. Please follow and like the SSTP page so that you can get instant notifications of the posts. I wish you all a very safe and happy week. In closing, as usual, I leave you with this quote. Today's quote from Abraham Lincoln. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves. That quote in closing from Abraham Lincoln. Well, that's it for episode 23, part 2 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Till the next program, I am Sashi Singh, bidding you goodbye, namaste, and ni samode. Goodbye, world, and may your God go with you. Cheers.